Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Good afternoon. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to hop in here and then we will get rolling shortly. All right. Looks like we got a pretty good attendees list. Let's just go ahead and start. You guys down? Ready to rock?
Never, I mean, always ready.
So what's been going on in the last month, guys? Anything exciting you've been working on? Any news you want to share? Or just some general BS here.
I don't know, I'm busy, right? Like trying to do all the things, man. I mean, as you know, I've been doing some studying up on cloud pen testing, stuff like that, right? Specific things to do with cloud environments and whatnot. Kind of doing some internal tool development, and then, you know, as far as the team goes, man, just owning a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was we been getting like a ton of success again lately with password spraying and whatnot, which is kind of almost weird. It seemed like it would go away for a bit, and then all of a sudden it's just like the wins just keep kind of coming in from just simple password sprays. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So what kind of passwords are hitting right now?
I mean, the traditionals, right? Like the things like you know, summer 2021 exclamation point, and fall. Today we got like 7 hits with autumn 2020 or 2021 exclamation point. Wow. You know, stuff like that. So just getting all the, I mean, autumn's the go-to, I think, for the fall for anyone who's got a password requirement of over 8 characters or something like that,
right?
Yeah. Like, oh, I can't do fall 2021. I could do autumn though. I can get around this rule. Yeah. I can still do something I'm not supposed to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're all creatures of habits, and it seems like those habits just won't die, man.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Occasionally little things too. You get things every once in a while, like just like the welcome 123 or something, because people set up new accounts all the time. They're hiring all the time, and they use a very basic password for, you know, like their onboarding or something. So
yeah. Any tips for our listeners out there? I mean, I know we always talk about like what a bad password is. We see it a lot, what a bad password is, but like what kind of general guidelines would you give the listeners for saying, like, obviously you don't use your month, don't use the year, right. You know, just tips in that general direction for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in general, I mean, the biggest thing is like just actually having, I think, user training, like really sitting down and not just catching it here and there because of a pen test, because maybe you do small internal testing and then just telling people, hey, that's not a good one, you need to change that. Like,
sure,
actually get your people together, you know, on a regular basis, continue talking about these types of things, you know. I mean, the other things you can do obviously are doing things like extending your password length out to 15 characters, something like that, which we recommend, you know, but a lot of people are against that, right? We have a lot of pushback, and a lot of times it's hard to implement things like this because if you have a disconnect with, you know, security knows it's better, IT knows it's better, but when you have a bunch of upset employees about something, maybe the people with management higher than that are just like, well, we have all these people that can't do their jobs. This can't be, you know, we can't do this. I've seen that kind of pushback.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of pushback too from people that have just had a system away for so many years, and a lot of old timers, right, who come in and say, nope. And typically they're in a position of authority, and they say that's just not going to fly here. We're not going to let that happen without understanding the risk they're presenting to their organization.
Right. Yeah. But I think it really does come down to training and being on top of it. I've met a few organizations in the past. I've done pen tests for some organizations who actually internally spray and crack their own passwords.
Oh, nice.
That was an interesting take on things. And when I went after them, when I tried to go after their password stuff, though they only had a character requirement of like 10, I think one of them was, I think they were both 10, the two that I'd run into that did this, 10 character minimums, they didn't have anything that was like sprayable, and they had a lot less crackable passwords, you know,
right?
Because they'd done, one, a lot of training. Two, actually, at one of the places I was in their restroom, I was using the restroom, and they had a thing on the wall about password policies and phishing. Nice. They had like things at the urinals above it on the wall about password policy and phishing stuff. I was like, wow, they take this stuff seriously, and they crack their own passwords, and they do all this stuff, you know. So I mean, things like that. But honestly, just putting effort into your password program beyond just saying, hey, you need to have this many characters, and don't do dumb things, you know.
Yep. Yeah, maybe even too, like, if you have the opportunity, the budget, supply your employees with a password manager. Teach them
Yeah.
how to use that, right? Use random generated passwords that aren't human rememberable. Those are
Yeah.
very effective.
Yeah, things like
Looking at,
that. I mean, I think a lot of people, the two problems, right? I think with the password manager thing is that one, if people aren't going to use the password manager for their Windows, their domain password, right? Because they need to get logged into the computer to get to their password manager.
Yeah.
Really. And it's too much effort for them to pull out a phone, get to the password manager, remember the password, type the dang thing. Like that's just too much. So that's that. And then the second part is what password are they using for their password manager, right? We still need to educate them and stuff. And it's just really, really important. We are winning so much still. And MFA obviously is a good one too. I guess if you're going to implement, I shouldn't say, I guess, definitely implement MFA. Also, when you're doing it, consider how it's done and what the likelihood of someone is to fall for certain types of schemes. So we're seeing a lot lately that if people are doing push related MFA, that we can just, if we get passwords, if we are able to spray them or phish them or whatever it is, and then log in, we just keep trying until the user accepts the push.
Yeah.
They just get annoyed or they're not sure what's happening. They're confused and they just accept it. I mean, not
Yep.
always, but very often they will.
Mm-hmm.
So actually having a code base, things like that.
Yep. Yeah, and we've seen that in some cases before too, where folks just blindly accept those pushes. There's so many connections right within, like, depending upon your architecture, you could have other applications that are using those creds and people just assume, oh, that's an integration, cool, approve it, and then you're in. So,
well, especially if you have an environment that requires re-upping of that push notification, saying, hey, you've been on for an hour, do you want to stay connected type of thing? Then your users are going to be even more trained to just accept it every time it comes up, man. I mean, if they're away picking up their kid from school or something like that, or whatever the situation might be, and they see that thing pop up, or they're away at lunch thing, and they're like, oh man, did I leave it logged in while I was like doing this thing? Yeah, let me just accept it so I can do that.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a kind of a spot where it seems like that would be a good thing to have those timeouts, right? But kind of causes a whole other issue there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. The whole password thing in the first place, right? The whole original, was it NIST guidance, right? Around the 8-character minimum, having it reset every 90 days, having this, a symbol and a capital letter. We thought, hey, these are all great things. This is going to make us stronger. And in the end, it made us weaker, right? Because now everything became, not everything, but it came, for most people, for a lot of people, it became very predictable. And now we're having to train away from that. And we always have to be worried about whatever we put in is for rules that actually what that's going to do is cause a predictable pattern in human behavior that's going to be worse than if we didn't do that in the first place. I think we should be aware of that.
Yeah. Complexity is not security. That's something I always say. You can have complexity requirements, but it doesn't mean it's secure. I see somebody commented here. Sometimes it's not just habits, it's something easy to remember. I think it's always what it is for most case, right? They want something that's quickly and easily rememberable. So I don't have to worry about that situation. I'm a fan of passphrases. I see someone mention that.
Passphrases are huge. My kids, my 10-year-old, my 13-year-old, they use passphrases. It was weird for them at first when I was teaching them and saying, okay, look, you're getting to an age now, you're creating accounts, you're doing things, you're out, you have internet related accounts and stuff, and we need to sit down and do this. And I had to make it fun for them, but it wasn't hard. You know what I mean? It was just one of those things. At first it took a little bit of like, well, why and what does this mean and how do I remember it? And I was like, it's not that hard to remember it. Just make it funny, make it a funny thing in your head. Or whatever,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, and I'll make passphrases that wouldn't be logical to anyone else, right? Only logical to me. I can make that connection to remember those things, but they're words that no one else would just think would go together in any sort of phrase. My wife and I both, like, so my wife adopted passphrases as well, and sometimes she'll trust me and share her phrase, like, hey, what do you think of this one? Is this secure? And it's like a 65-character passphrase, and I'm like, you're solid. Maybe it's going to take you 3 times. You're going to lock yourself out because you're going to screw that up, typing it in, but no one's going to hack it.
Yeah.
I see someone asked too, Eric, about what tools for internal password spraying. I'm not sure if you got any tips on that for folks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't see that one. I don't know if they're sending them directly to you.
It was in the QA. Yeah. So if you guys want to try to throw the question stuff in the comments, it's a little easier for us to monitor there in the chat. But we'll hit these in the QA first too.
Gotcha. Yeah. So what tools are used for internal password spraying? There's a PowerShell module out there called just like invoke domain password spray, I think is what it's called. A lot of people will use that. I have a tool that I made in C# that does it. So I personally made it. It's not released out there, and that's what our team uses. But it's essentially just goes out and it does the I think it's a verify password call to one of the APIs and just kind of does that. So well, it calls out to the LDAP over LDAP. But yeah.
Cool. How about you, Pinky? What you got going on, man?
Yeah, just same thing, right? Just busy. It's the time of year where we're all got a lot going on, but I guess kind of sort of the bigger one is we been working on our Linux forensics processes and that kind of thing here, because we do some of it. Usually it's you and I, Oscar, doing them and that kind of thing. So getting some processes built for the team and going through a lot of that. And it's just a different animal, right? It's just you got to know some Linux, and most of us are more familiar with Windows and that kind of thing. So with that, though, some interesting stuff came up, right? With in particular, working some Linux in Azure cases right now. Funny enough, not related to some of the things we're going to talk about later, but
I think though when we've seen those come in, we thought it was going to be related.
yeah. Originally,
it wasn't,
but
yeah.
I haven't seen any indications of that so far. But it did bring up a lot of interesting things, right, that we just don't think about. I know we've worked quite a few Azure cases, and it seems to be the really similar patterns over and over again, right? It's those firewalls. I personally have not done a whole lot of Azure configuration. I don't know if either of you guys have, but they must be reasonably difficult to configure correctly, because we see a lot of like, oh, I didn't realize RDP was open, or I didn't realize SSH was open, and that kind of thing. So, just kind of thinking through, telling people, hey, review those firewall rules, make sure that you've got things shut off like you think they're shut off, right? So, and obviously, as always, MFA everything, and review the accounts in your environment. Standard security stuff. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't need to do the same stuff for it. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, even with the new exploits and vulnerabilities we're going to talk about, still stick with fundamentals and make sure you're taking care of those. But the firewall one seems to be the main one, because I guess you've got to have a way in to manage the server, right? So people just leave it open, and becomes an issue later on.
So is that our phishing report?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, there's the phishing report, right? Take care of your Azure rules and your MFA and everything out there. So
yeah, I think Eric had a real good hacker tip of the month, not the week. It's the month this time. Don't use dumb passwords, right?
The millennium. Yeah. Honestly, that is a huge one. I mean, I think it's always the case, but yeah, we need to keep working on that. And on the note of the AWS stuff, or for not AWS but Azure, but AWS as well, when you're configuring firewall rules, I think generally it is okay-ish. I don't know, but I've seen a lot of people, I'll say this, I've seen a lot of people who just are setting things up originally, to start and trying to figure out how to get everything connected.
Yeah.
They set up kind of maybe a little bit too lax of a rule, and then it's not so much in the forefront of their mind later on. You know what I mean? And they forget there's not like even change management implemented for that infrastructure yet. And we see some stuff that just kind of slips through. It's like a development process, right? We see it in applications too, where like someone sets up configurations for development, and then eventually it makes it to production, and it has all these configurations that are flawed for production, but they're fine for development, right? And I think that's what we see sometimes.
Yeah, the classic case of let's make it work, we'll fix it later, and then they make it work, and they don't always go back to fix those things later.
Yeah, happens all the time. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point.
Yep. So personally, I've had a couple of exciting things going on last month since we spoke. I was doing some reverse engineering malware training. I finished that up and got my GRIM cert, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm happy to knock that bad boy out. Otherwise, I've been working on a project we're going to be formally announcing publicly here, and hopefully the next week. I'm thinking maybe Monday is that date. Our marketing team can confirm that. But we got a project known as Project Taffy. I've kind of been working on the last few months, which is essentially going to be a goodwill project where we're going to do threat hunting free of charge from an external standpoint for people's environment to look for signs of, indicators of a compromise, or to look for critically exploitable vulnerabilities, or to look and just see if, there's an attack campaign targeting a technology and you may have that technology in your environment. So the idea there is to be able to work with our clients and be able to try to help them kind of stay ahead of the curve. Ultimate goal is let's reduce the number of incidents that our clients and our partners have, because I mean, I'm sick of seeing people get ransomed. I don't like it. I mean, we're there to help you. We want to help you. We love that part. But at the end of the day, like I hate seeing all the hardships that these businesses have to go through. And if we can use our minds collectively to help our partners in any way, I want to try to do that. And so super excited about that project. We're going to be kicking out details and starting up a pilot group in the next couple of weeks. And so we'll get some information out about that soon. If you guys are interested in signing up, we're taking a limited number of people in the beginning as we build this program out and determine really, how much time it's going to take to keep our quality of service up and things like that. And then over time, we hope to be able to expand that. So even if you don't get in this round, sign up for the waiting list. So when we do expand that, we can include you guys in that pool as well. Another cool thing I was working on is we were just working a case recently, right, where we've seen a new novel technique utilizing REBOL to utilize REBOL for command and control, essentially. And REBOL is essentially a programming language, command line interpreter, runs on a lightweight executable, can run essentially on any OS. It's Windows, Linux, whatever. The install is like less than a meg, right? And so in the case we'd seen, it was pretty interesting where they had essentially a malicious email come in, had a malicious XLS document attached. When the user opened that, there was some macros in there. The macros essentially executed some commands, pulled an MSI, executed that MSI that dropped REBOL on the box, and then created some configuration files, and then essentially used REBOL to phone home to the command control server every 3 seconds to retrieve commands and execute those commands locally. It was just kind of cool because, it is command and control using an off-the-shelf product that there's, no EDR tool is going to pick up on that, right? So the only way you can pick up on that is if you see that anomaly and those connections coming out from that environment, or you have a good application inventory and that REBOL shouldn't be running there. And so I did an analysis of that. We posted that blog. We'll kick that out to everybody if you guys want to have a read and just be on the lookout for those things in your environment. That's the main thing here. If you see REBOL, you don't use REBOL, get it off your environment. Let's do some threat hunting for you. Make sure that we can limit that impact.
Yeah, definitely. I thought the REBOL thing was interesting. You brought it to me when you first saw it and were kind of showing it to me. And I mean, we see this in other things, right? Like essentially anything, I'm just blindly say this, but like anything that's, command interpreter that has an evaluate string statement could be very easily used like REBOL was in this case.
Yeah.
As a C2, right? Like auto hotkey macroing on your computer, right? Like you could, if you have that installed or someone could install it or whatever the situation was, you had a script that easily just went out, checked the thing, grabbed a string, evaluated it every so often. And that's essentially what this REBOL thing was doing.
Yeah.
The one specific thing about REBOL, at least here, is that it was lightweight. You could literally just take the executable and use it to do the command interpreting, right? Like it didn't require an installation. So
yeah, no install required. Just run the exe and boom, you got it.
Yeah. So
there's some other cool parts of that particular one too, Minx. But yeah, with the way that one was delivered and things like that too. But yeah, it was very neat. Sorry, Eric, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we'll send out the article if you guys want to read the analysis and have feedback or anything. Check it out. We'll share that. Yeah, that's kind of what's the haps has been around here. You guys want to get into some news?
I'm just gonna look at some of these comments in chat and whatever that are coming through.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had some questions on both Q&A and on chat about MFA kind of stuff, different questions, but I couldn't give you too much detail personally on MFA solutions as far as their configuration and stuff, just to beyond a very high level extent. I did note that someone said you should be able to script agent install or deploy via GPO. That is definitely a way to handle that situation that was asked about earlier about MFA being deployed everywhere. But I mean, if you just don't want to do that, can't justify it, then I don't personally have an answer right now, but it's not something, or it maybe it's something that other people would be able to help out with. Azure firewall recommendations. I mean, same recommendations for your normal firewall, right? Like access control, limited access control to what needs access.
Yeah, not so much anything to test it with, because I know that was on, what are you doing to test it? Just review your configs, right? Make sure that they are what you think they are, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you wanted to test, like Eric's saying too, I think just do what you would for your normal firewall, right? Like enumerate, see what ports are open, make sure those ports should be open, check the access and so on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when I need to check something, I'll just run it through like run a nmap from, well, I'll tether to my phone sometimes on my laptop and just nmap through that or whatever the situation is. You just making sure that I'm getting outside of what I know my ACLs are and then seeing what's there if you're looking to test things, or get someone else to test it.
So somebody was asking here about backup strategies pertaining to ransomware recovery, and we should touch on that for a minute. So you're looking for the idea of performing encryption client side before those files are sent. It's still very important to understand that even if you pre-encrypt those files, they can be encrypted again. You can't recover them. So the only true solution for backups that are ransomware proof is air gapping backups. You talk about that a lot. So developing some mechanism so you can get your backups offline. So if your network is compromised, those attackers won't have a path to your backups, tapes, offline disks, anything like that.
Yeah, we have actually seen encrypted backups that were then encrypted again. So it's not just a theoretical thing. It does happen. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Oh, I see somebody else said that too. The same time we did. Thanks, Heath.
And then in Q&A, we got, what's a good open source vulnerability scan tool? I mean, OpenBAS is an open source vulnerability scan tool. I think it's one of the few. It's probably the best one, but I'm not saying it's necessarily good either.
Yeah.
It has its downsides. It requires a decent amount to set up, but it is something that could work in a pinch. That's open source. It doesn't require you to steal away resources that you're trying to save up for the EDR solution, right, to use in the meantime.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's a lot of power in Nmap too, if you learn Nmap.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a vulnerability scanner, but it'll let you know a lot about things. And there's some scripts that will help with vuln scanning. I mean, yeah, if you, depending on your knowledge level and how deep you want to get into it, and how deep into the weeds you want to go, you could definitely use a lot of different scanning modules from Metasploit and from Nmap and from other types of tools. You could use Burp Suite to do scanning. Well, I guess not free Burp Suite. Burp Suite's pretty cheap anyway. You could use Burp Suite to do scanning of web applications internally. I mean, but you start getting pretty granular and a lot of work, a lot of time. So yeah.
Yeah, I see someone's asking about the Twitch TV compromise, breach, data breach, 120 gigs, I think is what I've seen. I haven't studied that a lot. I don't know a whole lot about how that happened. I don't know that that's been released yet at this point. So I seen it break last night and haven't studied too much. I don't know if you guys have looked into that more.
I haven't too much. There's a leak. I know that. I don't think they believe that there's compromise of user data as much as their data. I think they had IP leak is what had happened. But they did send out an email to reset like stream keys and stuff like that. So I think they were just kind of like, and they said in their email it's for overabundant security. They just, hey, look, we had a breach, so let's just make sure you guys reset your stuff, etc. But they didn't even say reset your passwords. They just said reset your stream keys, which was interesting.
Hey, you guys are firing away on these comments. This is awesome. So yeah, keep them coming and we'll keep talking and trying to answer here. Trying to make sure we responded to these. What do we think about paid vulnerability scanners? I think that's a solid question. I mean, kind of like Eric had mentioned with OpenBoss, OpenBoss is okay. It'll do in a pinch. You're going to get a better level of service for those paid scanners. Typically, you're going to have plugins that are going to be released for relevant vulnerabilities a little faster. Also, on top of that, you get support, right? So if you're having issues with that tool, your contract will typically include support. I'm not sure what level. I see Eric shaking his head.
Well, and also because the end of that comment is we have had issues lately with Tenable IO support.
Yeah. But there are other options too. I think Nexpose is a good alternative. There's a few options out there. I think just going with a paid solution though is going to give you a leg up on an open source solution there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this about Tenable support because I've dealt with them in the past. Sometimes I'll have my issues, but generally we can get decent responses and work through things. So, and sometimes the response might not be what I like, but it's what it is. At least you're getting them, and at least you're having someone to deal with it. But you're going to have that with everything. Honestly, it's not like that's a Tenable thing and you go with the other ones and they're not going to have those issues. You're not going to have things that go wrong and have support issues or support waits and stuff like that. You're going to have that. But overall, you tend to get better. I'd say you do get some support and you get better service out of it and you get faster things.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I did notice one more in here about higher recommended paid EDR solutions. and then followed up with 3 that are, you know, pretty okay. So I mean, I can speak to a couple that I have experience with. I mean, I don't want to say we're necessarily recommended them, but have worked well and been okay. Both CrowdStrike, or I'm sorry, Carbon Black and Sentinel-1 have used both, really like both. As with any of this stuff, though, it's going to come down to configuration and monitoring, right? So you can have a really expensive, top of the line EDR solution, but if no one's looking at it or they don't understand what they're looking at, then you're in trouble. And if it's not configured in a way that alerts you for certain things, you're in trouble. You know, just
lining. Yeah,
exactly right. I mean, and you know, to be honest with you, I'm not going to mention the name, but I very recently had some experience talking to some folks that had a very high end one that didn't alert on some things that, you know, it absolutely should have alerted. It took about a week to generate an alert on something that would have been, you know, game over for them in a couple of hours. So definitely configure those. Make sure your alerts are set up and everything like that.
yeah,
All
yeah.
of the
time.
Yeah. Most of them out there, I mean, pretty good, right? I mean, Defender. We also had some dealings with Defender ATP and things like that. So you know, it's all pretty good, to be honest with you.
I think the biggest gap we see is what you're touching on there is a lot of people may think these are out of the box solutions. You plug it in, you push play, and you're safe. And that's never the case. You know, those tools are only as powerful as you make those tools. And specifically when you get into advanced EDR, it does take a lot of configuration, monitoring, and things like that, or you know, so it's worthless at that point if you don't do those things.
Yeah, it can be very drastic. As an attacker, the first time you run into something that just shuts you down so completely, that leaves a lasting memory, right? So the next time you hear someone's using it, you're like, oh, here we go, right? I've had situations where I'm like scared of what I'm about to deal with, what I'm going to run into, and then all of a sudden I go to the next person's environment who didn't configure it properly, and it's almost as if they don't have anything at all. And you can take something that's very expensive, configure it improperly, and it can be very bad, you know. So,
Yep.
But at the same time, that exact same product could have just shut, you know, me down entirely to the point where I was just pulling my hair out on another engagement. So
Yep.
It's a big deal.
I see someone ask here too, is that because it wasn't an intelligence-based solution? And I think all of these solutions we're talking about would tout themselves as an intelligence-based solution. But it's important to understand an intelligence-based solution only works with intervention and configuration still. And so there's so many different things that we talk about the configuration aspect. And there's also the same thing, it's called alert burnout, right? Where folks just get into a routine and a pattern so much that they may be checking these alerts, but they may be seeing, okay, these are all level 5s. I never have to worry about the level 5s. And so they just miss all those alerts rather than looking at them one by one and understanding, oh, one of those level 5s actually in my environment and in this situation is actually a critical event on my network. And so, no, it's not because it's not intelligence-based. It's more so because what we say, those intelligence-based solutions still rely on human intervention to be effective. All right. We got more, or you guys want to roll the news? Let's see.
Have not used Stingbox Honeypot, nor do I know anyone using it.
Yeah, not using Stingbox Honeypot. I will say that the Remnix build has some pretty cool honeypot features. If you're looking for an open source honeypot, it's got built in all the tools you need to build a honeypot. It's super lightweight. It's quick to deploy. It's typically pretty easy. I mean, if you have that Remnix build, it's a Larry Zeltzer build. It's open source. It's free. You can go Google that and find it right now. You can have a honeypot up and running in your network in probably 15 minutes once you get that by utilizing the tools that, you know, INetSim that are on there, HTTP service, pretty much anything you need to stand that up. Have not used Chaos Monkey. I'm not sure, Eric, are you familiar with that one?
Nope.
Yep, we'll check it out though. All right. Good stuff, guys. I really I appreciate the interaction today. This is a lot of fun for us, and hopefully it's fun and beneficial for all you guys as well. Not going to have as much time for the news, but that's okay because we're going to email you that stuff anyway.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, let's dig in. The first one I've been dying to talk with you guys about. Hold on. Yeah, yes, that is a bobblehead doll back here. This is
no, I think they're saying, is your camera mounted on a bobblehead doll?
Oh,
it's moving.
This is James Madison. No, my camera's on top of my monitor, and I get very animated sometimes. And maybe I bang my desk, I move around, and yeah, it shakes my camera. So
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah.
I moved my light.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Making me blush here. Anyway, want to talk with you guys about Microsoft announced last month that it's going passwordless. I'm sure you guys heard about this. Let's talk about it.
I mean, I did just talk about how bad passwords are, so getting
Yeah,
rid
I
of them,
know.
right? Might as well.
Yeah. I mean, I get it, right? Passwords are tough and everything, but I just don't like it. I don't like the removal of another method. I'm a layered person. I like having belt and suspenders, right? So I don't know that. I mean, my take on it is okay, cool. We don't have to deal with passwords, but I feel like, I mean, I know you can enable MFA with this. It's a little bit tricky to, I've not played with it personally, but it just feels like we're going back to OneFactor, and I don't love that. I'll just say.
Yeah, it does feel like it's, to me, a direction in that direction as well, going back to a single factor. I have thoughts about, I think, implications, but I think Eric's for it. So I'm anxious to hear Eric's reasons as to why he's for it.
Yeah, he wouldn't share before the call, so now we gotta do
I
that.
just, well, it's like, why waste the conversation before
Yeah,
the call?
I agree.
We can have it on the call,
Right.
I wouldn't say that I'm for it per se, but I'm not against it. I do think, look, as an attacker, I do know that one of the biggest weaknesses constantly is their passwords, right? And I would agree with you that going from two-factor back to one-factor is a mistake, or that's not a good solution. Problem is how many situations out there we're not on two-factor yet anyway. How many people are not implementing a second factor yet anyway, right? And if I'm to choose between this one factor or that one factor, I mean, I'd rather, like, I can guess someone's password, but I can't guess the other things. You know what I mean? I can, there's a lot of this stuff that I do feel like, as an attacker, it concerns me. If people are using it, I would have a harder time getting to their accounts. That's the simple truth of it. And so when I think of it from that perspective, that I would have a tougher time actually if they got rid of their password and used something else, because I wouldn't be able to get my hands on that without actual effort, right? You got to think about how many times that we're talking about, how much of the compromises in the IR side are you dealing with their drive-bys, their shotgun sprays on the internet. They just got caught up in it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of this is not specifically targeted attacks, right? Most of the attacks we hear about, most of the stuff, most of the ransomware, most of the whatever is not a targeted attack. It's a specific blanket attack, right? And password related attacks are blanket attacks too. If we can get away from that, then the only way to necessarily attack some of this is to actually target someone's things that they have that they're using, their phone, access to whatever their text messages or whatever it might be, OTP pads, stuff like that, right? And so once you take out the ability to blindly attack someone, it's going to prevent a lot of things. So I'm not saying I won't look back on this and be like, oh, I was an idiot. You know what I mean? But like my first impression is just like, man, it's a huge weakness. And I would, from an attacking point of view, it would make it less worth it for me to try to attack someone's account if it wasn't something that was potentially really guessable or something that I could phish, because I also can't phish these things either, right? I can phish them once, but then I can't phish them. You know what I mean? I can't continue to use that. So I don't know, man. I honestly do feel like it might not be as bad as it sounds.
It's a good perspective on it, right? Had not thought of it in that way. So yeah, I don't disagree with any of those thoughts. I know I have other worries too, just later on, but I mean, probably overthinking it at this point until we really see it implemented and see what everything looks like with it and everything. So, but I don't know, Mix, didn't you say you had some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is just long term here, like the other implications this is going to introduce. Right. And I do agree with Eric's logic that, if we have to compare, like we know a lot of our instance right now are sourced from people who have single factor on publicly accessible systems. This is a better alternative to that. So use another device for authentication. But what scares me long term is the idea that I think we're going to see a paradigm shift in how attackers are targeting their victims at this point, and we're going to see a shift to these devices, right? So we're going to see attacks start to shift more to mobile, to try to be able to compromise those mobile devices, to try to compromise those authentication keys and things like that. And then, like, as a forensicator, this is a can of worms, because right now I know that most employers are giving their employees access to business systems through the use of personal devices. And so then we get to the point where there is a compromise. We chase that back to where we know that user's device had to be compromised, but guess what? It's a personally owned device. And so to be able to forensicate on that, we're really overstepping the bounds. If there's not proper agreements that the business has in place before they gave that user access, it may halt our investigations to be able to identify those techniques the attackers are using to get into the environment. And then it makes it harder for us to keep them out after we identify that. And so I think it's we're seeing a whole shift come. We're going to have a much more larger focus on how we control mobile devices and our employees. And I think we may have to see employers go back again to saying, we're going to have to own those devices that you're using to access our systems or you're using for authentication to our system. So if this does occur, we will have a legal right to be able to investigate that so we can stop it throughout the rest of our environment. That's the only thing I fear. But really, I mean, that's not enough for me to say this is a good thing or a bad thing, right? That's the nature of our world we live in. These attacks are going to constantly evolve. I'm just, forecasting there's going to be something new down the pike that we're all going to have to start thinking about with this.
Yeah, I definitely think it changed. I mean, that's what I was alluding to too. It changes the vector entirely, potentially, and it doesn't make problems go away. If like you said, mobile attacks increase, but what that's meaning is that we blindly blanket attack mobile devices, try to use that to then compromise and thing, but then you're blindly attacking that. It's going to be a weird layer. It's an extra layer. It's going to be strange, and who knows what will come from it. I don't think it's the best way to go forward. I just think that if I'm comparing just a password to just an authenticator, I prefer authenticator, I think.
Yep.
But I prefer you have both.
What I mean? Like,
like you said, belt and suspenders. You know what I mean? Like I'm
right.
not saying that I think we should not have two-factor. I think you should still have two-factor. But if it's only one factor,
it just always made, anytime you've got Microsoft saying things like this, and I remember a few years ago when they first started talking about this or whatever, it's just more of a, like, you started getting a lot of people going, well, Microsoft says it's okay, it's best practice, or whatever, and kind of go down that route and don't think about the multi-factor aspect of it. And that's what makes me nervous. But I do agree totally with what you're saying there. I do have some questions about this too.
Another opportunity too for Microsoft to continue to bake people into their ecosystem, because looking at this as well, like you can't use Google Authenticator, and so you're gonna have to set up another authenticator app to be able to use this. I do see they're gonna allow like physical security tokens, like YubiKeys keys and things like that. That's going to be permitted. So I do like the physical keys a little bit, unless somebody loses that, and then we're out the door again, because we know how people like to use keys, lose keys, I should say. And then, I did see someone notice as well, biometrics is going to be included in there as well as another authentication option for the rollout.
Well, I would say at least on the thought of having a hardware key or YubiKey key, something like that, right? And then, I mean, one, the two losing it options or issues are that one, if you lose it, someone could use it, but then they have they find it, they're not going to know what it goes to. Where
I don't know, my keys say Oscar's keys on them.
Or there's going to be a label on the back of that says,
if keys lost, return to Pinkman.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Pinkman, here's my Microsoft login account to email me out.
Or email me at pinkman@microsoft.com.
Right. Okay, you know what? You deserve what you get. I don't know.
I don't have labels on those, but I'm just saying, I know people are going to do that.
The other thing I was saying is that you should have duplicates if you're using something like that, right? Like I have, I think 4 YubiKeys keys personally. You know what I mean? So
stick one in your safe deposit box at the bank or something like that, right? Somewhere that you can.
Another technology I see they're going to accept for authentication is Windows Hello. I'm not familiar with Windows Hello. Started looking into it briefly before today. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
The trick.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the trick with this, just based on the question we have in the chat, right? Like there's that there. Again, though, if you don't set it up that way, you're back to one factor. That's kind of the trick. But
what was the question, Pink? We should probably read these questions because I just remembered we are a podcast too, and people are going to say, "What the hell are those guys talking about? This podcast sucks. I'm out."
I was just someone asked if if we're talking about Microsoft Hello, it says you still have to have a PIN, which to me is the same as a password, right? So that is an option, and that works on Windows and everything now. But there's an opportunity. I think the way this new one's set up, again, I've not got to play with it yet, but you can sort of not even have that PIN, right? You just hit the button on your authenticator app and move on.
Yeah.
Someone asked if there's passwords are still an option on Windows 11 or was it removed? I mean, as far as I know, nothing. It's not that passwords are removed. It's
Right.
you have the option to
Right.
remove it. It's an optional thing. Windows 11, at least in the version that I'm currently testing, I'm still using a password. So I don't know. I'm not using the most recent version either, though. Magic Links signing. I'm assuming. So what do you think about Magic Links signing in without password? Like for web application logins, for like getting access to things. We've seen a lot of like I've seen insurance companies. I've seen rental companies using these types of things. Hey, gain access to this. Your doctor's appointment. Here's a magic link to kind of just log you in and look at this stuff. If that's what you're talking about, then I don't like them. I don't mind them, I guess, if it's a one-time use thing. If it's a one-time pad that's being used to get you in. I used one yesterday. I don't actually, for Etsy.com. I don't have an account there. I'm not going to ever make an account there. But
I was hoping you would start a wall, man, and I could see your Etsy.
But it kind of creates one for you when you do your orders and stuff like that. And so now it's like, hey, do you want to log in and track your order? And I'm like, yeah, I don't have a password though. And so it'll send me a link. It's a one-time link that I can use to sign in because I don't actually even have a password. And because I never use it hardly, right? So if you have a one-time thing, I guess I'm okay with the idea of it. But if it'll consistently log you in every time, I that's terrible.
Well, we know those tokens, the way those work too. Like they're not always generated in the best possible way,
Right.
and depending on how it's developed and things like that.
And let me clarify why I think it's terrible without just saying. I mean, because they get cache places, they can get stored places. I've seen many times where we saw this when we have a guy on our team who did a research study into link shorteners and the stuff that was found in those. And a lot of people use link shorteners to shorten up those login links. And so then they get stored into the API and all this stuff. You can query them. You can now find them. You can go and get access to tons of people's accounts if you attack link shortening sites and stuff because of things like that. So that's why they're terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I don't know if Finley did a write-up about that or not. We should get him to for sure because it was interesting and it would probably shed some light on these questions here.
I think you did a talk on it, right?
Yeah, I know we did a talk.
At BurCon, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was a write-up on it.
Yeah. I see Kim asks, you joined a little late on our opinion of passwordless from a hacker perspective. I think we have covered that a lot. Probably go back and give it a listen again and you can dig into that and get your answers, I hope.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, cool. So there's a lot of Microsoft in the news today.
In the last month.
Yeah, in the last month, every month.
Today.
Yeah. No, our news today. This is my news today.
Didn't know we had ownership of this news. All right, sorry, my bad.
I mean, when it's come on. The OMIGOD exploit. This is one that I know is being actively exploited. Over the course of the last month, we mentioned we do have a couple cases right now concerning Azure Linux systems, and we've seen that and said, it's likely going to be it. Turns out it wasn't. It was a different thing, which is good. I think the impact is a little better for what we're looking at. But anyway, so it's a bug in Microsoft's OMI. This was interesting because it seems like a lot of people don't even know what OMI is. A lot of folks who are deploying these Linux Azure servers don't even realize they have OMI on those systems. And from my understanding as well, it's installed by default if you're running a lot of Azure related applications. And so this is one of those things, like a lot of folks could have been impacted, were vulnerable, had no idea they even had this running. If they read the news and said, I don't use OMI, cool, let's move on. So left a lot of folks vulnerable out there that were likely unaware of that.
Yeah, I will say, and this will go back, I guess. Well, also let's say this. It is by default installed and on with, like you said, many applications and with Azure management in general. And this is for Linux servers in Azure. That said, the port isn't supposed to be remotely open by default, so it shouldn't be remotely attackable by default. But we did just get done talking about how people will make mistakes, right? Like on their firewalls and they're and letting things in, not realizing they have ports open. So you definitely want to be aware of that. You want to be aware of the status of your ACLs and your firewall, things like that. But you also want to be aware like that you do have OMI and that it's up to date and stuff like that. So
yeah, maybe explain to what OMI is for folks. From my understanding, it's essentially WMI for Linux, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, without diving deeper than it's a management interface for the Linux servers in that environment. So think about it like that, WMI for Linux and Azure. The vulnerability itself was, from what I understand, simply that you could just remove the authentication ticket.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is rough. And, you know, I will say though, that is actually a really common thing you see in like web application type stuff, right? I think there's this, it's just like from a coding perspective, if anybody out there is an application programmer, you can easily see how someone would take an input and say, well, I don't want to deal with this if it isn't set. I want to make sure that it's set so I don't throw an exception, right? So one of the first things you do when you're taking an input from someone else is to go, well, if it is set, if it's not none, or if it whatever, right? Then do these things with it. And problem is sometimes you don't remember to put in the stuff if it wasn't there, right? So like I've seen this many times on web applications where they're like, well, we put in cross-site request forgery tokens, right? Anti-CSRF tokens. And it's just like, yeah, but if I don't send the token, it works like it normally did.
Right.
Or similar thing. I've seen JWT implementations where it's the same thing. It checks to see if it exists first. And if it does, then it checks to see if it's in its database and you do have authorization and you're logged in. But otherwise, it just does the rest. It doesn't die on failure. And so, you know, it happens. You just hope it wouldn't happen here.
Yeah. It's just passwordless authentication, right? I mean, that's all we're doing here. We're just enabling passwordless authentication.
No. That's authenticationless authentication.
That's true. Yeah. I just wanted to just kind of to reiterate, you very likely have this installed on your Linux-based Azure servers. Look for things like OMS and things like that as well. There were a bunch of
If you have Azure automatic update enabled, you have this. That's the one that stuck out to me when I was looking at the service list.
Yep. And they do a lot on the system. You know, I mentioned them looking at some Linux forensics and things like that right now. These things are noisy. There's a lot going on with them, so you should be able to find them.
Yeah, I think the big thing here though is like Eric had mentioned, like make sure those default ports aren't open. I think it's 5986. So make sure that's not open. Update your servers too. The one thing I did read is that even if you have auto update on, some of these specific builds aren't auto updating this particular module. So go check if you're running Linux Azure servers. Make sure you have those OMI updates. It has been patched now, so apply the patch and you should be good. That kind of leads into the next thing. So Microsoft released a patch for actively exploited Windows 0-day vulnerability. They released a whole bunch of patches. So yeah. I think the one that was being actively exploited was specifically CVE 2021-40444, which was the RC remote code execution in MS HTML. I think most of these attacks were kind of like we talked about before with the REBOL exploit, likely going to be a phish, or you downloaded a malicious Office document from the web. That document had some ActiveX controls that was able to exploit this vulnerability in MS HTML to give the attacker remote code execution abilities on your system. Yeah, you guys have any other thoughts on that one?
Not necessarily. I mean, I without having to go for a real deep dive into all of it, and I don't know that would even be valuable. I think realistically, you said what matters here. You know, there was a thing, a lot of remote code execution in Office documents, and the same things you would normally do to combat that, because you should always expect that there's going to be something that's going to get by somewhere there. You know, right. When you're not just Office documents, when you're getting phished, when you're, you know, running something you shouldn't, or downloading something you shouldn't, clicking something you shouldn't, you know, limiting.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
It may be good to just explain what MS HTML is. I'm not sure if all our listeners are aware of MS HTML.
Sure. I mean, the MS HTML is the interpreter, right? The HTML interpreter for Microsoft.
Yeah. It's just like essentially IE lot that integrates with other applications, right? So it's built on that IE core. You can integrate it within ActiveX controls, other applications, whatever, if you need to render, retrieve HTML content. So it's IE that's built into other things, essentially.
Yeah. Lightweight.
So what to do on this? Same things we always say: don't open Office documents if you weren't expecting them, right? So be suspicious if you're not expecting someone to send you that. don't enable content. The same things we always say. Right?
Same, all the phishing things, right?
Yeah. And I see there is some opportunities within GPOs now, so you can, like, from a domain level, you can disable all ActiveX controls within MS HTML. You can disable ActiveX controls in Office. So do those things. I mean, if you don't have a need for ActiveX in your organization, specifically within Office, to just shut it down, get rid of it. You don't need it. There's a patch. You should go patch for sure, in case your users aren't going to listen to this later and remember they shouldn't open that Excel file they weren't expecting, that says that they want $1 million, or they have to give me some information or they're going to go to jail. So yeah, not a lot else on that one. I know there was a lot of other vulnerabilities patched in the last month. Like, from my tally here, I think there was other RCEs that these weren't actively exploited in OMI, like we talked about, the ActiveX components in MS HTML, the Windows WLAN auto config. There's a Visual Studio RCE and another one specific to Word that were all patched in the last month. So kudos to Microsoft, I guess, at that point, because these weren't exploited that we know about yet. And they were able to patch those ahead of the game. Seen there was also a memory corruption flaw in the Windows scripting engine. And there were 3 priv-esque flaws in Print Spoiler, again, that were patched. So I think that's probably related to Print Nightmare. They keep continuing to find vulnerabilities related.
We're just calling all Print Spoiler things Print Nightmare now, right? I mean,
yeah,
Print Nightmare Infinity.
Infinity, right?
Yeah.
I would just say too, I mean, kind of as you're going through the patches and stuff from this past month, just to let you know, I've heard the ones coming out next Tuesday, there are just almost a ridiculous amount of RCE, remote code exploits in this next run too. So keep an eye on your patches next week when those come out.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to say, Jack and Tyler in chat, thanks for helping each other out.
Yeah, you guys, I'm trying to keep up. Yeah, you guys are killing it, man.
Yeah, I was going to comment on one of those too. I mean, I'm not overly familiar with a lot of the automated threat hunt applications. I know there are threat hunting things built into a lot of the EDRs and that kind of thing. But just like we were talking about earlier, get some human eyes on that, because it can be really easy to just sort of be like, that's a level 5 that doesn't matter, like Oscar said. So human threat hunting is always a good call. So keep that in mind when you're looking through those. And for those on the podcast, because as we did it again, it was a question about doing threat hunting through applications, even if you have an advanced EDR and that kind of thing. So.
And it was brought up in chat that, if you have IoT devices and other things that can have EDR installed on them, then there's going to be value in that for sure. So,
yep, absolutely.
Yeah, we always like to say too, like, a threat hunt isn't just a tool, right? When we threat hunt specifically, we look at every single thing in your environment, right? And that includes those IoT devices. It's going to include all the systems, obviously. Really just taking a comprehensive approach for anything that's active on your network, and analyzing all the traffic to and from those things. So I think that's an important part of why the human element is so important. All right, cool. So I think we've got time to touch on this one real quick. New Azure AD password brute forcing flaw was discovered. I think SecureWorks discovered this. That has no fix. And this one is pretty interesting because the fact that even if you have MFA on, and I've seen someone ask about SSO earlier, so this is going to be important to listen to if you're using Microsoft SSO. It's essentially a flaw that's baked into SSO. So specifically along that authentication chain after a user is authenticated, right? There's an opportunity in there to abuse a specific element where that element does accept single factor authentication credentials. It doesn't log any connection to tips. There's no lockout policy applied to that. And so it's a field day for attackers to be able to essentially brute force this vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, can't call it, I don't know if it's a vulnerability, but this method of authentication, implementation or whatever, right? This method of dealing with this interface.
Yeah. And Microsoft has stated this is a design right now. So from my understanding, they don't have any plans to fix this.
It's hard with Microsoft because they've said in the past, like, that this, we don't consider this whatever, this is by, this is whatever, we'll keep it in consideration as we make changes, and then it gets patched 2 days later. So hard to say, but yeah, they did kind of say, well, that's not a vulnerability, right? Like, this is by design. I mean, it's weakness by design, I guess.
My thought too, looking through that one, was if you guys look, there's 5 error codes that it generates, and I thought that was a little interesting because the error codes are things like user does not exist, or the user exists but this is not the right password, things like that. They give you a little bit too much info that you can keep playing with, and I know that's something we often tell people, like with your web apps and things like that. Don't, if it fails, don't say bad username, or don't say bad password, specifically say invalid credentials or something like that. That way you don't have any more clues to go off of.
Yeah, it elicits a very verbose response for our attacker, I would say.
Yeah.
I will say too, I know that, so 2 points, we'll touch these quickly, primarily affecting SSO, but also if your organization uses pass-through authentication, you may be susceptible to this attack as well. And the other thing, going back to, I guess, to Eric's credit, man, earlier, passwordless accounts are not affected. So,
hey,
so maybe you won't look back in 6 months or however long you said and say I'm an idiot. Maybe
I never like I'm a genius.
I never do. Yeah.
even if you should.
I'm just trying to give that humble appearance about, like, I might come back and eat these words. I won't. It's fine.
Yeah. Hey man, if you're right, you're right.
I undid all that work, man, just by that statement alone. Dang it.
Is there anything else you guys want to touch on that one?
I don't think so. I mean, pretty much covered it, I believe.
Yep, check it out. We'll send you guys the links, read up on it so you're educated. Last one we'll hit on, then we have a few more we'll share, and all the email updates and stuff next week. Krebs put on an article recently about the security.txt file. A lot of organizations are, think of your robots.txt, also putting a security.txt file on their web applications. That essentially has all your responsible disclosure information. There's a template that you can get. Krebs links to that template, but typically the file includes the email address to report disclosed vulnerabilities or identifications on your website, your OpenPGP key, so you can have secure communications, a link to your security or disclosure policy in there as well. So any researcher who identifies something on your site can quickly understand what your policy is surrounding that. And then an acknowledgements page as well. So if you have rewarded someone for reporting a bug before, have that acknowledgements page up so people can see that as well. I was happy to see this. This is something that we kind of graphed about before. I think we've all dealt with at some point in our careers where you identify something, you try to responsibly disclose that. There's no way to understand what that policy is, who you should reach out to, and then even eliciting a response from someone on the other end once you try to disclose that information. So I'm happy to see this. It's not a standard yet, but I hope it does become a standard because we all need to focus more on developing those responsible disclosure programs. Yeah, it's my thoughts. I think the downside is you're going to see a lot of spam probably. And we see this here, like, people are just going to Shodan and looking for anything and trying to report a benign vulnerability or benign finding to you. So be aware that traffic may increase. But at the end of the day, I think the benefits outweigh the negatives there. If you are focusing on having a way to accept these disclosures, because you have to look at it positively, right? Someone's coming to you before they're breaching or they're exploiting. Pay attention, give those people some respect, and listen to what they have to say, because it may save your ass in the long run.
Yeah, my angle on this, when I first read about it and saw this one, it was my first thought was like, okay, so it's a file that's going to be on there that has some information, right? Reminds me of a robots.txt. And look how good of an idea the robots.txt was. And then it became this thing that now, like, everybody's just like, well, you can't put stuff in the robots.txt because then attackers know where your stuff is.
Yeah.
And so I thought about it from that perspective. Like, does putting this out there do anything negative, right? And like you said, the only thing I think I can think of is just it tells me who someone is I can contact about technical things potentially, right? I mean, they're probably not going to be the easiest person to phish, social engineers, so it's not necessarily helping me out much, but in the very least, spam is going to increase a lot for that. There's going to be a decent amount of people just trying to report things even legitimately, but just massive amounts of kind of reports that are, maybe a little less important, things like that. So
yeah, I'm with you guys. I'm happy to see it. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's frustrating to find something and try to help somebody out. Just, hey, look, I found a thing. Can you just go fix it? Just be cool. Like, I like your website. Please don't don't go down, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then just see it stay there for years, because they don't they just don't acknowledge you and or think it's just spam or garbage or whatever. So
Yeah, I do think
hopefully it
too.
helps.
I want to be clear that I'm not just down on it. I was just saying from the other
No, no.
side of it, but I do think it's. I mean, as someone who attacks stuff and you find stuff and you want to know how to responsibly disclose something, it's very frustrating when you run into a situation where you don't know how to properly do it, or when you run into someone who takes it the wrong way, which is, I think, a lot of people's situation. A lot of times people want to responsibly disclose. More often than not, it seems like they get met with this like they're a criminal, right?
Yep.
And I think at least it'll comfort some people who find these, that know that they're there, though, because I think there's a decent amount of people out there who've been maybe jaded by this and burnt by this to the point where they're not even going to report it to you. You know what I mean? And so if they find this file, they find this information, it kind of also not only says, hey, this is where you do it, but it also says we're open to it. We're not going to take this wrong. And so
For
then
sure.
it's on your side that if you implement this, you don't take it wrong when someone reaches out to you. But
Yeah, that's why I see a lot of power if we can standardize this long term, because it's going to force people to be educated on that fact. And I've seen that so much where people just get spooked because someone tells them they found a critical flaw in one of their hosted applications. Like, oh, what do I do? You think that, dude. You talk to them and figure out how you fix it, and then probably give them a little cheddar. So
Yeah.
All right. Good session. I think that's a wrap. We'll get notes out. Appreciate all you guys for joining us. Again, I really appreciate all the interaction today. It was a lot of fun. I think we all appreciated that. So
yeah, I
hope
prefer
you guys all
talking to
have
you guys than these guys. I'll be honest. So if you that's cool.
Hope you all have a safe, happy, and fun weekend. Enjoy some of this beautiful fall weather, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everybody.
Adios.